Good evening, everyone. It is 7 o'clock, time for the Kechi City Council meeting for June 11th, 2020. And the first thing that we'd like to do is have a roll call. Teresa, would you please call roll?
Margaret McCormick. Here. Matt Brewer.
Here.
Ryan Adams.
Here.
Betty Washington.
Here.
And Richard Wolf.
Here. Would everyone please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Next item is to approve the consent agenda. Council, I know that you received the packet several days ago. If there are no changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion we approve the consent agenda.
Okay. I'll second it. But it's hard to hear that. Is that you, Richard? I'll second you. Okay. All right. We have a motion by Brian, a second by Richard. All in favor to accept the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that carries 5-0. Next is to approve tonight's agenda. We do have an executive session. Mr. Condor, is there anything, how long do we need for executive session?
Yes, if you would correct your agendas to reflect that the executive session is one for non-elected personnel and is scheduled for 15 minutes. That's the only change I have to the agenda. However, would like to relay a COVID-19 update at some point during the meeting. We can do that during communications if you'd like.
We'll add that as item C under communications.
Yes.
Any other changes? Not, I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's a motion by Matt, a second by Richard to approve the agenda with the changes that we just talked about. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we have an agenda for this evening. The first item, communications. I'd like to do something that is not on the list for a particular reason. I could have Thomas come up here. Matter of fact, let me speak so I'm on the microphone here. Thomas is celebrating his 10th anniversary with the city of Kechi, and we're going to bring around a certificate for him, and also your name has been engraved on a plaque that will be going out into the lobby. And if I can come around here. Where do you want to picture it, Teresa?
Yeah, if you guys want to just go through. Yeah, it just, sorry, I was writing it.
Get out of the way.
Thank you. Oh. The official one there.
Congratulations, Thomas.
And one comment I'd like to make about Thomas, and looking at the Public Works Department report for the month, you are working your tail off. Thank you for all the work you and your staff are doing. Great leadership, Thomas. Thank you.
Very detailed.
Yes, yes. Very helpful. Okay, our next item is a public forum. Is there anyone wishing to address City Council this evening? Seeing none, we will move on to item B, any civic groups or committees needing to address council this evening. All right, seeing none, we will move on to item C for a COVID update.
Thank you, Mayor. Bob Condor, City Administrator. Just real quickly, we had intended to come out of modified phase 2 and begin the phase 3 of the governor's ad astra plan that she had designed, certainly no longer in effect and not in force. But we were using that as a model. However, local advice from Dr. Ginn, the county health officer, is recommending that we remain in modified phase 2 with one exception. Instead of gatherings of 15, he said gatherings of 20 would be allowed with social distancing allowed and masks recommended. In order to, there has been an uptick in cases in Sedgwick County, and as a due precaution, I'm going to recommend we follow the guidance of the county health officer. And even though it is not mandated, it's highly advised and recommended that we continue under modified phase 2 with the allowance of 20 people in a gathering, social distancing, of course, to be respected, and of course, hand washing and good hygiene. So that is to continue through July the 2nd. And so I would, unless council decides otherwise, I intend to go ahead and proceed with operations here at City Hall under that guidance with all due precaution.
Does that need a motion or?
No, it doesn't. It's basically an operational matter here at the city, and I'd be happy to make sure that gets carried out.
Okay. Council, any questions? Okay, thank you, Bob, for that update. Next item is old business, the Kechi Road and Oliver intersection project.
Excuse me, we've got an executive session there.
I am sorry. Boy,
Mr. Mayor, I move we go into executive session. The subject to be discussed during this executive session is non-elected personnel. The justification for closing the meetings, discussion relating to non-elected personnel, and the time and place at which the open meeting shall resume are
7:22.
in the city council chamber.
okay, we've got a motion for the executive session by Betty. Have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Betty, a second by Matt. All in favor to move into a 15-minute executive session to discuss non-elected personnel, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Margaret, did you?
Aye.
Okay, all right. 5-0, we will return here at 7:22.
Get my bag.
I know, I don't like it. I'm very kind of yeah. But I will.
Okay, so who do I listen to? You know what I mean? Like, we done.
Done did good. We worked.
this, I don't look at it.
So it's been,
This thing there,
that's what you guys are doing. We were gonna take it down when we painted. It's not the black one. The black one opens darker though. And Laura said,
I have mine.
I think, we got the Arbor Day thing was on one side.
Nobody really made sure he was. And I asked, but I didn't.
I stayed with them, so
You know, Chief always like special.
So there's people in the crowd.
Yeah, crowd control.
Well, I think everything is recorded too. Recorded on Zoom.
Oh, it was really good. I thought about it.
TV food order for
Chili's.
Okay, fine.
Was it Chili's or Carlos? Carlos and Carlos.
Yeah, so they have. So I can tell you, if nobody's ordering food tomorrow, I'm leaving. We just got it. Saturday. You change lettuce and then you get salsa and chip. Yeah, we got like a side of rice. Yeah, they have a bunch of different.
Oh, maybe I did, but I just think I didn't need to go.
Yeah. And we had it like, I was really excited. My family wasn't listening. I wasn't about it. Oh, yeah.
Just from, well,
Oh, there you go.
just from a ethical standards. Us, but, well, it was.
But it goes both ways. Yeah. Just.
You're in a professional setting.
My husband works at a pretty big company, and they have issues. Oh, God. Oh. Oh, my God.
You just, yeah, like something that.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and it's.
Every meeting is something.
No, that's like when you talk to like your basic talk business. No, like my word, you're having, right? No, like when you're talking to. Yeah, or something. There's a record. Yeah, we did.
This was like, I was like, well, wait, well, you left, and so then I saw that. I mean, I would think that. Did you invite her? Okay. I want to know enough that it covers like transportation or. I'm thinking like. But I think you could write up minutes.
Like that in accountability.
I'm not talking to you. You're right.
Social practices, right?
Yeah.
Where they wanted us to, generate
Yeah, I'm fine.
I do want to use it.
I think there might be something out there that's better, but I'm not gonna go look for it, so. I
I
mean, you
just
guys,
have to teach a lot of.
I'm just, yeah. I mean, I'm gonna use it now, but.
Well, you're like, when Teresa's late, you don't always look too late, and I just leave.
Maybe all the time. But I stay late all the time. You have to make up for it. Are we gonna take this thing seriously, or are we just gonna put a bunch of like? Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Oh. It's like a. It's not. Kind of for evaluations, you can go and put like real time comments in it. So awesome, so late, so needs to do this training, it's like.
Oh, so you can see it, everybody can see it popped up.
Yeah, based off the certain. Like settings. So. We're hoping it will not make the evaluation process.
I finished the task today, yay.
Yes, yeah.
All the way to get to that one, because it was the road sensitive directions, but I got there and I didn't
Feels
give
like
that
you could also.
read. And then I did not send Siobhan that completed final,
Oh, okay, yeah.
that with it signed in the right place, I didn't get that, and get it signed, so.
Did I see it?
Yeah,
That was with the packet you.
no, it's that one that, one that Earl signed yesterday.
Oh, yeah, I saw it.
Yeah. But it was wrong, he signed in the wrong spot, so. Well, I send it to her or CC. Send it to you. I usually, I'll see it through. Yeah, grab all my project stuff through there. It's just kind of, it's all together and I can just kind of sort through it. I try to change things if they need to be changed. And I usually do try to do it, especially if you guys have something on you that I don't know. Yeah, I will do that.
Is this one paused? As we return to the regular meeting, I want to remind everyone that pursuant to the Kansas Open Meeting Statutes, no binding action was taken by the city council while in executive session. Next item is to discuss the Kechi Road and Oliver intersection project burial of utilities.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me while I cancel this timer, or it's going to be going off while I'm standing at the podium. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, I have included since we last met, forwarded you an interactive spreadsheet to assist you in helping guide your decision on the Kechi Road and Oliver intersection project. The project is currently on hold, awaiting a council decision to move forward with the burial of certain utilities in that right-of-way. The engineering of that is hinges on the decision that you make, both from some of the utilities from professional engineering consultants. Ben Mabry with PEC is here tonight to answer any questions you might have. I'll answer any questions that you might have with regards to this. The information that staff has forwarded to the council addresses the question of whether or not the intersection project can be paid for. The question before the council tonight is not to decide how it's paid for, but the means exist to do so at some other point, because that I suspect that will be a much more involved discussion and decision on how to move forward. So with the means existing to do so, the question exists whether or not the council wishes to move forward with the burial of the specified utilities or to put those above ground. There's a cost factor to either one of those. And so given that, with the information you've been provided and with the summary I've provided, I will stand for any questions, and likewise will Ben Mabry from PEC.
On your document about the intersection project, you listed 4 options. The council may take the following actions. 1 is authorize below ground. 2 is authorize above ground. 3 is to table a decision. And the fourth is their action as required.
As required by the council.
Well, it says as required, but
Yes, and that would be a decision that council would make.
correct. I've heard a lot of questions, and I can't answer the questions. I don't have the background for one thing. But I personally think that we need, I guess I would make a motion that we have an additional session where questions and answers can be, because just asking them in this setting, I have a feeling that one question is going to lead to more questions, and I think we need more time.
And the decision of paying for that is certainly is a longer discussion. But again, I want to get back to separating the actual question of whether to bury those utilities or keep them above ground.
Right.
The resources exist within the budget that exists there, or with new revenue sources. Either way will require additional revenue. And the question before the council is, does the council have the confidence that and the commitment that will be paid for? And there's one other option on here that's not listed, and I didn't list it because I don't get the sense that the council is interested in considering it, but the remote possibility that the council may decide not to do the project at all, in which case the grant from KDOT would have to be returned. And so I went under the assumption that the council did not want to pursue that course.
That's true.
Well, I guess I would make a motion that we have an additional session to take questions and get questions asked and answers, and then proceed after that, what decision that the council wishes to make.
Can part of Saturday be focused on that, or is that not part of the agenda?
The intersection project I had hoped to have decided by this evening, and if council wishes to ask questions this evening, we have the finance director here, we have professional engineering consultants, we have our public works director and myself. Any of these folks can answer questions you might have regarding.
There is a motion.
True.
I've made a motion. I don't know.
And I was asked a question and I responded
whether
to
we
that.
have a second. I didn't hear.
I'll second it.
So we have a
We have
second.
a motion by Margaret, a second by Richard to schedule an additional session to do this. All in favor?
Well, hang on.
Is
Is there an
sorry.
opportunity to
Sure.
ask questions about the motion?
Sure.
Okay. Margaret, are there a list of questions you have that you want to address that I mean, because now's as good a time as any to ask the questions.
Well, there are questions, not only my questions, but other questions that I've heard. And I think that my fear is, not fear, but my feeling is that once we get started asking questions that it's going to go the rest of the evening. Because there's a lot of questions. So
There's not much else on the agenda.
you may not,
Yeah.
you may not have any questions. I don't know,
I
but
mean, I do, and they're related around the funding, and I know that's one we're going to struggle with. I just didn't know why we couldn't do it tonight. But another session is reasonable, but I think some questions can be asked tonight, certainly.
We asked at the last council meeting for our finance director to provide us all of the documentation and information.
Well, I mean, I think some of the information that I received anyway begs more questions about reserve funds and fund balances and all that as compared to other cities. And I don't have those answers right now.
Well, whether it's a public forum tonight or Saturday, tend to agree with Brian that we have the people here to discuss
I guess
this.
my concern too is that this motion doesn't tie how we pay for it with actually voting for it. Most people don't buy something if they don't know how they're going to pay for it. So to me, we need to figure out how we're going to pay for it as well as what we're going to do. So that's my opposition to
Where
this
I'm at too,
motion.
Richard.
I think we need to find the means before we can make the decision as to do it or not do it.
Right. And I know that the spreadsheet provided all kinds of great scenarios and it was a lot of information.
Yes, fantastic job on that.
But I have questions about the reserve funds and how we compare to other cities. From what I can tell, our reserve funds are huge compared to other cities. We have a lot of money in the bank gaining no interest. So I'd like to see some of that money used toward the project rather than borrow the money at a higher interest rate than we're making on the money. So there's things like that we should talk about, and we haven't talked about them.
I think
And
we probably, oh, go ahead, Bob.
there's a motion on the
Yeah, I was
floor,
gonna say we probably
so
need
I'm
to call
not
the
going
question.
to interrupt that.
Any other questions before we vote on that motion?
Could you read the motion again?
The motion is for us to schedule an additional meeting to discuss this project. Is that correct, Margaret?
So technically, we're tabling it for now, correct? Or is the motion to schedule a meeting specifically to address the question?
I'm going to defer to you, Andrew.
I have two questions about the motion, frankly. One of them is yours, which is, I would imply, or I would infer that the motion implied that there's tabled for tonight to be pushed off to this additional session. I think the second question is whether your motion, council member, is intended to be a meeting for discussion with city council and staff, or whether you intended some kind of you said questions and discussions, some kind of public hearing / meeting.
Oh.
Just for clarification's sake, I wasn't sure what you meant.
I think the staff, the council and you know, the treasurer, that's financial director, excuse me. People who, you know, will have answers. The public may or may not want to be involved, but they wouldn't be involved in a question and answer session as far as I'm concerned. They could attend, obviously, but.
Thanks for the clarification.
Well, I have a motion on the table right now. I'm going to call for a vote individually. Richard, how do you vote?
Aye.
Betty?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Margaret? Okay.
Does that table the discussion for tonight?
My understanding was the intent was that motion tabled it. No, there's nothing to prevent you from discussing whatever you want. It's an agenda. It's an open meeting.
Okay.
Good questions. We can't ask any questions.
No, he's
about-
saying we can.
Oh, okay.
He's saying we can.
Mayor,
Yes.
may I address the council?
Yes.
So I know you guys still have some open questions right now. My concern is when we meet to go through and answer a question and answer session is that I'm not going to have all the answers readily available.
That's what
Because
I'm
I'm
worried
not
about as well.
prepared for your questions and the research that goes along with them, especially if I'm going to be tasked with looking at other communities. So if you could please get your questions together, email them to me. I'd be happy to look into them, provide some more clarification. And just as a reminder, I'm always available for emails or phone calls or questions as well, if we don't want to do a formal, meeting. So
And
thank you.
if I might suggest, with the gathering of all the council members here tonight, would be a great time to ask those questions so that we could compile that information and then do the research necessary to provide those answers. And those answers may prompt other questions.
Well,
But
again, one of my questions that came up with the information that Cammie sent me was that we have a lot of money in reserves. And when I did research, we appear to have a lot more money in reserves compared to our yearly budget that other cities do. And we're getting very little interest to none on the money we have in the bank right now. So to me, it would be better return on investment to use some of that money, not drain it down all the way, but use some of that money to pay for this project. Now, I know we
Agreed.
probably couldn't do it all, but part of it anyway.
Agreed. And
So-
that fund balance, we have agreed for a long time that it's getting rather large.
I mean, it's
And-
almost 100% of a year's budget on
and-
every category.
And
So-
to put it to work is a prudent strategy that we should follow for of course, some of that to make sure that we reserve portion of it for other items. But yes, that we can address that question
Okay.
regarding fund balances.
And I'd like to see some kind of a percentage of yearly budget that Cami thinks is prudent for a fund balance and opposed to a reserve fund, because there's two separate buckets there.
And I'll let Cami correct me if I'm wrong, but over the years, we have discussed a GFOA recommendation of 20% of the annual budget as our fund balance. And I believe the council has expressed in recent months, probably within the last year, that a 25% would be more accommodating to this council.
Well, even if we did 25 in every category, we'd have enough money to pay for most of this project. So
Yeah, and I'm not prepared to speak to
Right.
the actual numbers right now.
I've researched it, yeah.
Sorry, may I address the council?
Yes, you may.
So when it comes to the fund balance that I sent, we can't use all of that fund balance on the project. A lot of, the utility fund balance,
Right.
obviously, the bond and interest fund, there's certain funds that we legally
I know
can't
some's
tap
restricted,
into.
but I
So
didn't have the information.
yeah, so we can definitely look at the ones in which we would be able to
Right.
use some money and then have the discussion of what's already budgeted in those funds and if that's still a priority.
I mean, and a lot of the expense is involving utilities, and that's where those fund reserves are for. So couldn't a lot of that money be used to move utilities?
Only if they were our utilities.
Right,
So
like the
to
gas
move
and
our-
water, sewer,
Right,
those
so
are all ours.
yeah, and the relocation of the gas line is going to be bonded through the gas fund, not
Okay.
through necessarily the street.
Okay, we didn't have a
bond.
breakout on
Yeah.
that, so I didn't know.
And Cami, that was my question, is an understanding of the restricted funds and what's not restricted,
Okay,
and how that can be broken down.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can put that together for you.
What other questions, council? Would you like staff to research for this future meeting?
I guess the other question I would have would be on the stormwater. We don't have a specific fund for that now,
That's correct.
and we're
We
moving it from general funds
we
to,
transfer out of general fund to fund the stormwater utility.
Again, council, if we have the people here available, I'd like to know at least what some of these questions are so that they can.
But I
research.
think the questions are mostly stemming from how to pay for it. And I know we want to push forward and get an answer as to what we're going to pay for rather than how we're going to pay for it first. And I agree with Mr. Haddock and Mr. Brewer on that I think we need to figure out how we're going to pay for it first. But I'll remind that we've got $1.5 million gift looking us in the face that's going to be real hard to turn down. But it comes with extensive costs that I'm not confident we can pay for without going to the citizens for more, and that's very troubling to me. And so the how is very important to me.
well, by my calculations, if we do a stormwater fee that was proposed, we can pull the rest of it out of the reserve.
How does a
fund.
stormwater fee affect whether we
It's
do a
about-
street or not?
It was about 95,000. So we don't have to pull 100 grand out of the general fund and put in the stormwater. So we've got extra money in the general fund, I think, to pay for this.
Because we're not going to be funding the
We're not funding the stormwater separately.
Well,
We're funding it
and-
on its own.
I see where you're coming at with that, but I'll jump in the Wayback Machine here for a second. And this was my concern when we created the stormwater utility. Stormwater maintenance was something we've done as a city for, how old's the city? Okay,
We've
that
had-
long.
We've had a stormwater ordinance on the books since 2003.
Okay, for 2003. Then we said, well, we want to create a stormwater utility so we can start separating out and understanding how much of the general fund money we're spending on stormwater and how much we're spending on everything else. And so it was originally created simply to collect those expenses separately. Then we said, well, we need to start funding it. And that's where I said, well, wait a minute. We've always done this. Why do we need it? Why do we need to start charging the citizens more for something we've always done as part of the general fund? If we want to do it that way, then let's charge the citizens via a fee as opposed to a ad valorem tax. But then don't we then owe them something back on the ad valorem because we're just moving the way we're collecting the money? If we don't do that, we're actually collecting the money again. And I'm not sold on that yet. And so I feel like I want to keep these things completely separate. The stormwater issue is a stormwater issue, and we know we have new unfunded mandates from the state that say, here's all the things you got to do, Kechi. You've got to sweep the streets every time the county puts salt down. You've got to test the water every time it rains a half an inch or whatever it is. Got all these new expenses that we've got to pay for that we never did use to collect, but that's certainly not the full $100,000 that we're saying we need for stormwater, because a lot of that $100,000 was stuff we were always funding out of general fund. Mm-hmm. And so I think this stormwater utility fee should simply be to pay the difference in what the state is making us do that they didn't used to have to make us do. And I think that entire discussion and decision is completely separate from the intersection project. That's just my opinion.
If I may revisit again the Wayback Machine, as you put it, we since the stormwater ordinance was created, and I hope I'm not speaking out of term because I haven't been here since 2003. For the most part, it was just a document that sat and was practiced when it was convenient. There was not a great deal of oversight or recommendation from the state or guidance from the state with regards to utilizing that. And Kechi was not alone in that, but the practices actually were done as an afterthought or only done when it was absolutely necessary. Those actions were performed. And so it represented the true actions toward the stormwater were a fraction of what the recommendations are today that we move forward, that we fund stormwater. The state now, as mentioned, has really ramped things up because the state's under some pressure now from the EPA. So they are extending their enforcement arm and requiring cities to do more to actually do what is in their stormwater plans. And so now that we are actually, if you think about it, we are now starting to function and treat that as the true utility that it is, that it was formed to be recently within the last few years. And the utility should be a standalone item. So this is just like we've created something new that we're starting from scratch. It would be as though we've never funded or paid for streets, even though that obligation still exists. We could look back and say, those streets have been here a long time. But if we've not done any maintenance to them and we start doing them all of a sudden, we have to find those resources to be able to pay for those things. And the stormwater utility is very similar to that philosophy that we've had on streets. And so I look at it more of a new fund that's required of the city that we have to pay for, just like our streets. And so to say we've paid for it before, we have, but we just have not fully committed to paying for it as we should before. Now we're being forced to.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's 70% or 30%. I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers in that detail, but I know it's not 100% because we did take care of the storm sewers in the past. We did dig out the ditches in the past. Those were things we did. We didn't sweep the streets after every salt and sand. We didn't test the water after every half-inch rain. Those are new expenses, but there's a line in there somewhere and I don't know where it is. And that's where I think the stormwater fee needs to cover is those new things that we've never done before, not the new things plus the things we always did so that just to boost the general fund.
Well, and I can say that the things that are being done now and being practiced are, most of those are as a direct result of the most recent mandates that have come down from the state. So these are, I mean, they're hard for us to swallow, but we understand it's a responsibility we need to abide by.
So I'll just say that as we continue this stormwater utility fee discussion, I'd want to see that because I know we've been tracking it for at least a couple of years, 3 or 4. I don't remember when we put the utility in place.
Honestly, it would be a guess if I told you how long.
It's something like that. We ought to have some data that we can look at to see, okay, here's the expenses of the new stuff we've done and know that, yeah, that's in the utility expenses, but that's something we've always done. So we can, move the money around and make sense of what it is that we're going to go to the citizens with.
I'd like to invite Ben to come up if you would, since you're here representing PEC. And if you could maybe.
I have a question for Ben.
Okay,
actually.
good. Well, that will be great. Ben, if you'll come up.
Good, I can sit down.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and Council.
At least in the document that we got at the end of May, it showed the different expenses on above ground, underground, and all of that. The PEC amount stays the same no matter what. No matter whether we bury the utilities or we don't bury the utilities. My question is that correct?
I don't know that I can fully answer that because I'm not sure what information was provided. I was not directly copied on that. So
I thought there was a
Okay.
redesign that
Well,
we'd have to do. We do.
I have
100,000 above ground.
a document that actually from PEC that I believe you were the one that was here, and where you were asking, the PEC was asking for an additional $32,000 based on, I guess, the utilities being buried underground. And the total that shows in that agreement is $207,400, and that's the amount that's shown in this document, no matter whether
Yes.
they're buried or not.
yeah, so that 207, I forget the number after that, but that value was what we are currently under contract for.
Okay, well, at the time, when you were telling us about the amount and asking for, this agreement, which we did sign, but at the time, I recall asking you, Bob, somebody, I said the council hadn't decided yet whether we were going to bury those utilities or not. And you looked a little confused, but you said, well, if it turns out that you aren't going to be burying them, then we'll reduce the amount that we expect to be paid.
So I think that was related to the scope of work that was in that particular amendment to the original agreement.
Field stake 20 pothole locations.
Right.
Would that not have all been related to burying the?
It was, and when that agreement was signed, we performed that work. So that's our.
But the council still hadn't approved. So I don't know who said, go ahead. I mean, yes, we signed it. We did sign the agreement, but there was a verbal, and I've looked through the minutes, and of course, there's nothing in the minutes about it, but Rocky. So my question is, it doesn't matter to PEC whether, if you went ahead and did the work, even though we shouldn't have asked for it, you've done the work, so you expect to be paid for it.
Our
I'd like to
understanding,
have our city administrator.
If I could, the potholing that was done were exploratory pieces done to determine if and how those could be put underground. They're actual holes that are dug to locate and identify structures that are in the ground. And without that, there's no way they could have continued on with the design.
But what if we had said we didn't want to bury them underground?
at the time, we were exploring whether we were going to go underground or not, right? And so in order to complete our design and get feedback and good information back from Evergy and the other utility companies, we had to go to that effort just to get a number, just to, I guess, refine the number.
It's not fair. I've got this here, and you probably don't have it memorized.
I don't.
If you want to look at it.
I don't, but I do know that the scope that we performed was under the scenario that yes, it would go underground.
Right.
But it didn't necessarily mean that the city had committed to going underground. It just meant we had to do that work. And then once we did that work, we could share that with the utility company, and then they could provide back their estimated pricing for their side of things,
So
if
did
that
we
makes
get that
sense.
number back from Evergy?
What's that?
Did we get the number back from Evergy then?
Yes, yes,
Really?
yes.
Okay.
That I've sent that information out, which I don't have in front of me right now, but they originally quoted a number over $1 million, which they reduced by the cost, the difference in locating the utilities above ground. And again, I don't have those numbers in front of me, so I can't speak to that
Okay, well,
accurately.
I guess that would be something I would like to, some additional information I would like to have.
I'd be glad to send it to you again.
Well, when we get together for our session. You can send it to me if you want, but maybe somebody else would like to have.
Cameron, could you?
The most recent estimates that Evergy's provided were included in the scenarios that I sent. It's scenario number 1. And that's the most recent cost estimate we have from Evergy. And then the other scenarios were just estimates that we've kind of discussed. And I want to point out the $207,400 that PEC is currently under contract for. Those amounts came directly from the document that was submitted for the grant. Most recently, when we postponed the grant a year, that's where I took those numbers from. The $100,000 is just a placeholder for a redesign. If we have to do a redesign, nobody's committed to that number. Nobody's really said that number. That's just an estimate that I have right now.
Those numbers are for redesign by Evergy and also the utilities that would have to go back and redesign to go above ground versus below ground.
So we don't have all the numbers then?
Not if we had to do a redesign. It would be just the cost to tweak the designs we already have for going above ground versus underground. And we haven't gone and had those final conversations yet about how much that would cost.
Okay, thank you, Ben.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of Ben while he's here? So that we can get research, or they can do research before we move on?
Did you have any additional information that you might know, or anyone else that we can provide regarding the actual numbers or estimates provided so far?
Well, no, I don't have anything right now, but
Okay.
between now and if we have agreed that we're going to use Saturday morning as a session for this, I don't think we've actually agreed. We haven't necessarily agreed.
The council did not specify
Right.
what date to table this to. There is an agenda already provided for the retreat. And if the council wishes to alter that agenda, they may do so, but there's been a lot of work go into preparing that in a short time frame.
Well, if you would prefer to have it be another day, like another week or something.
We are scheduled for 4 hours, and if the council wishes to take that up as the open forum section toward the end and extend that as long as possible, as long as it needed, then the council certainly is welcome to do so.
I think that makes the most sense.
That's fine.
I have a question on, like, say, option 3 is 600K to Evergy. If the council voted to approve that, are we just telling Evergy that's what we're willing to pay, and then they can either accept or reject that offer? Is that what this is?
That is one suggested option, yes. The council may draw the line wherever it feels appropriate and advise me to go back and take that, whatever that number is, whether it's that or some other number, to Evergy and say, this is the most the council will pay. And then leave it to them whether they're going to continue with burying the lines or moving them above ground.
Okay.
If I may. I just want to reiterate the point that to send me your questions if you can email them to me or call me tomorrow. I'll have one day to prepare for this workshop. So I would appreciate as much advance notice as I can get.
And if I could, our finance director's been working really hard on the budget as well. Remember that? Remember the budget? We are really running a very, very, very tight timeline. We were waiting on numbers from the auditor. We were waiting on numbers from the state, holding our breath, and just we have as much information as we're going to have to help craft a 2021 budget. So I want to remind the council that really is going to need to take priority. I don't want to lessen the importance of the intersection project, because even though we have requested and been granted additional time, the clock is ticking on this. And I really, I out of consideration to our engineering team and to Evergy also, I think both of those groups are eager to get an answer. We want to provide you with all the information we can, but we're splitting our time now between this issue and our budget.
I understand those concerns with the engineers and stuff, but most of the residents here that I've talked to are very concerned about raising taxes. So I think the citizens are more important than whether the engineers are sitting there waiting on us.
I agree. I'm just trying to accommodate as many folks. We can't make everybody happy, but at the same time, I want to be sure that we allow them enough time to complete their work.
I'd like to ask a question that, what if the council decides that they don't want to move forward with this project? What?
I don't know all the legal ramifications. I'm sure there's some way we can unspool this, and there are other communities would love to get their hands on our grant. So we would have to give back the 1.5 million for sure. We would be obligated to pay PEC for the contracted amount. There may be requests from the other utilities for the design work they've done too, and so that's an unknown.
Maybe that's another question we would like to get an answer to, a legal answer, probably. What it would take to unfurl it, if that was what the council decided.
We can take a look at that. I said we can take a look at that.
Thank you.
And then maybe along with that, what we've invested up to this point, what it's cost us to this point today. I don't know if that's possible, Kim.
We're stuck with it no matter.
Yeah.
We're stuck with it no
Yeah,
matter what.
I can pull the actuals that we've paid year to date, but as Bob said, we're also still committed to PEC for the contract. So.
Right. So that would be good to know as well.
Okay. Let's go ahead and, unless I have any other questions, let's move on to the next item. CESF coronavirus grant.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Bob Conger, your administrator. I'm going to ask our finance director, Cami Schroff, to really describe to you this next item. However, I do want to commend her for taking the initiative to apply for this grant. These are funds that are dedicated to preparing the city and equipping the city for expenses that have been incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in the midst of right now. And additionally, preparing for a possible next wave. And so anyway, she's done a fantastic job with this. And I think it certainly deserves recognition of her. I'm going to ask her to come up and talk a little bit more about this grant, what it addresses and what it means to the city.
Mayor, council members, Cami Schroff, your finance director. So on May 20th of this year, the city applied for and subsequently was awarded federal coronavirus emergency supplemental funding. The federal coronavirus emergency supplemental funding, or CESF for short, is a program that's providing funding to Kansas communities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. Grant awards can include state agencies, local units of government, tribal governments, nonprofits. All grant projects that were funded by the CESF program are for a period of 18 months, beginning June 1st of this year. Approximately $5.9 million is available for distribution. There was no match required for this grant, and the grant application was actually submitted to the state of Kansas to the governor's grant program. There were various things that qualified, but I really asked staff to use their imaginations on things that could help us out, or what we could have used during the first few months of the pandemic that we didn't have readily accessible to us. So I'm happy to announce that the city was awarded $60,848 to aid in the implementation of remote operations by mission critical employees during a pandemic and provide necessary personal protective equipment for our staff and even the public coming in to use our city facilities. This will also be used to help us prepare for the next wave, as we're also preparing for that. So I'm very pleased and very happy. That was actually the first grant I had applied for and written by myself. And I would just recommend that the council approve acceptance of the grant monies when they're available.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I assume that there's no cost to the city.
No, there's not.
It's sometimes we have to, come up with a certain amount of money for a grant, but
Right.
in this case, no.
There was no matching funds for the grant. And also in your packets is the budget that we submitted and the items that we identified as well.
Yeah. Good job.
Thank you.
I so move.
I second.
There's a motion by Betty, a second by Matt. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carries 5-0.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great job, Candy. Thank you.
Next item is our city administrator ordinance amendment. Mr. Conger.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Bob Conger. Within the city code, the ordinance that's provided for the provision for a city administrator, the city administrator has several powers and duties that he or she has to perform. Nothing is addressed within that ordinance regarding his or her absence and how those duties are to be carried out at such a time. This ordinance allows for the city administrator to designate and appoint one of the currently 3 department heads to act in his or her absence for extended periods. And so at this time, I'm asking that the city update the ordinance to include the verbiage that is included in your packet, ordinance number 1757-20. I'm asking the city council to approve that, to allow the administrator the authorization to appoint that position as needed.
I'll entertain a motion at this point.
Second.
Motion by Betty, a second by Richard to adopt ordinance 1757-20. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, we wanted to make one adjustment. We did not want,
Yes, we requested that rather than an adjournment, the motion be for recess to the session on Saturday morning.
if there's no other things to discuss this evening, I would entertain a motion to recess until Saturday at 8 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Matt, second by Richard. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. We are in recess until Saturday morning. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
I've got a question. Thomas?